Let's date forever. Here's your weekly dose of relationship fuel with Sammy and Nathan Yeager. Hello and welcome to Date Forever. In this week's episode, we're chatting about entering a new relationship in the pressure cooker of COVID lockdowns, tapping into and embracing your feminine or masculine energy, how sharing your needs can better your relationship, and the benefits of scheduling in intimacy. Sammy's actually away this week, so we're going to jump straight into this week's ep. So here it is.
Today we have Carl Taylor and Liz Edwards joining us. Carl is a best-selling author and host of Entrepreneurs Rising podcast. Liz is an ex-corporate go-getter turned full-time mumma, and they have a beautiful love story they're going to share with us today that has resulted in them having a beautiful 2-year-old daughter. Their relationship was tested and forged during COVID, and they've both taken lessons from previous relationships so that they can show up differently in this one. Welcome to the show, you two.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, excited.
Yeah, a COVID couple.
Yes, we definitely were the COVID couple.
That couple.
we had fun of one of our. I still remember. I'd come back from Texas, March 2020.
March 2020.
Or I've forgotten what year it was. Whatever it was, just as it was happening, I came back from Texas and I had to self-isolate at my parents' house. And there was talk of borders shutting. Liz was living in Victoria and Melbourne, and we did a date over FaceTime. Dressed up date night over FaceTime, and I'm counting the days of like, are they going to close the borders? Are they going to close the borders? And I technically, sneakily may have left my isolation one day early to jump on a plane to get down to Melbourne, and then the next thing you know, we're living together.
All.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how long had you been dating at that point?
I would say less than 3 months.
Yeah, we had our first date, our first official date. We'd met the previous year, but we had our first date on January 8th that year. So just before COVID kind of started.
Yeah, wow.
Wow. And then you'd obviously spent some of that time doing long distance.
Yes.
A lot of long distance. Voxer was our friend.
And then boom.
And then straight moving together.
Yep.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, don't do things in halves, do we?
No, so very, very quickly we were like, yep, we're in this. And then because we were in Melbourne, we had the 5-month lockdown of you can only go 5Ks. Like, so it was proper, we're in our house, we're here now for the next 5 months. Don't know when we'll get
But by house, it was actually a tiny 2-bedroom apartment. So there wasn't a lot of breathing space while I was working from home and Carl was running his company from home. So there was a lot to navigate there.
And she had a cat, and I'm allergic to cats.
Which is hilarious.
I actually remember, I think it was you, Cole, that you shared a post about being allergic to the cat and how you were navigating that and like vacuuming 3 times a day.
Bought a robotic vacuum cleaner to vacuum constantly. And before that came, you were getting up early in the mornings at the beginning, like vacuuming the house, cleaning the house.
I was, sweeping and vacuuming at sort of 5:30 in the morning, like before my morning routine, and
wasn't
doing
sustainable,
all the
but it was
things.
very sweet in the honeymoon period.
In the honeymoon period, yeah, sort of fizzled a little bit.
Well, you've vacuumed less now. No, it sounds almost dystopian, doesn't it? Talking about lockdowns and 5K radiuses and like having 1 hour for exercise and, you know, alternating who can go to the supermarket to get groceries. Like, it just sounds so bizarre that we lived through that. I look back now, I'm like, it sounded stupid to document, oh, today I sat at home all day. It felt silly to document that because that's what we were doing.
I haven't literally left my house in 5 days.
All day, every day. But now I look back and I'm like, I wish I had kept more of a journal about what life was like that day to the next day, because I think what we forget is that when we were in it, we didn't know when it was going to end. Like that perpetual, we were running this marathon with no idea how far through it we were and how far we had to go. So I imagine that was pretty intense environment to be starting a new relationship in.
Yeah.
Definitely.
It was fun.
Yeah, like, but there's one of those things they say, like if anything was going to show whether or not we could make it work, it was that, right? Like it was a pressure cooker of some of the backgrounds of what we were coming from in our previous relationships, and then we're in this pressure cooker environment where we can't really get too much space from each other. We're there. It really made us go, okay, well, we can clearly, if we can get through COVID, we can get through anything, right?
Not to mention about a month later, after Carl moved in, you encouraged me to quit my job.
Oh, yes.
My corporate job. And this was very much part of my identity as how I saw myself. I saw that as quite a significant part of the Liz Edwards that everyone saw. And here's Carl inviting me into my feminine and going, I really think that you should quit your job and trust me to support us and study what you want to study and do what makes you absolutely light up. So I did that and came into his company as in a growth role and helping with customer service and client experience and sales, which was my background. And so we did that during lockdown as well, and sort of being in that small confined apartment. So that
is wild. You're like, do you know what? We're not spending enough time together. Let's actually start working together as well.
And that was a challenge. Like, it got to a point where it was really challenging to navigate that, the working together. More probably my issue, really, I struggled with this kind of being the leader. How do I be the owner and the boss of the business and also be the boyfriend that, I struggled to be able to say, hey, no, you can't do that, because I'm putting boyfriend hat on versus boss hat on. And we got to a point where I actually had to kind of say, hey, I think, our relationship comes first, not the business. And you should no longer be doing what you're doing in the business. That was kind of what we got to.
Yeah. And it was pretty intense. I mean, just imagine. So here's me. I've come from a heavily masculinized industry, working predominantly with men in the kind of role that I was in. And so I'm a go-getter. I've got goals. I'm very ambitious. I'm very focused and driven. I can be quite direct in how I deal with my team. And now I'm working with my amazing boyfriend, and I don't know how to channel all of that energy that I had been learning for 13 years in corporate. And so here's Carl going, what the fuck have I got myself into? My girlfriend
I told her to quit her job and come work with me, and now I hate it.
I know. So that was really hard.
It was.
And it was hard for me. I mean, I, as many women may be able to identify with this, and men as well, we're raised and we're conditioned to be the good girl and to always be, striving and being seen to do all the good things. And I felt that was what I needed to do coming into Carl's company. And so I also brought that energy into it, thinking I needed to prove myself, when Carl already chose me. He didn't need me to prove myself. He just needed me to surrender and just be. So that was a really amazing lesson for me to learn quite early in the relationship, after deciding to pull me out of the company and for me to focus on what really lit me up at the time. So that was quite interesting to navigate as a couple.
Yeah. I remember Liz had some challenges of really, even once it was like, hey, like, I don't need you to provide in any way. Like, the way you provide for this family, this household, is just showing up happy and joyful and just being you. And you really struggled for a while that, like, you were like, but don't I need to contribute financially? Don't I need to do this thing? Like, it was a real challenge.
Yeah. I mean, my parents, the dynamic was somewhat reversed to what we see a lot today. So my mum was the full-time worker, the main breadwinner, as they would say, and my dad worked casually and looked after my sister and I. So for me, what I had seen was this incredible woman working so hard. And so I, of course, took that on and really had to relearn how to tap into my feminine, because I didn't know how to do that. And that's learning for me with Carl, obviously starting in COVID, but even still today, there's so many things that I'm still learning about how to soften and how to be in my feminine and how to enjoy that process. It's been one of the most amazing gifts to experience, especially with Carl, who's so encouraging. So, yeah.
Because we're on an audio platform, you need the disclaimer that these two are just like lovingly doe eyes looking at each other with like the heart eye emoji, like in real life. It's very sweet. So I want to go back to something that we said in your intro in the bio, that you've both entered this relationship with a very conscious mindset to take some of the lessons that you'd learned from your previous relationship. So maybe, Liz, can you tell us a little bit about like where you were at when this relationship started and what you were looking to consciously bring into it?
Yeah, so when Carl and I decided to start our relationship, I had just left my husband at the time. And so that was huge for me. And I didn't really have a lot of time for myself, a lot of solo time, and sort of dove straight into this new relationship. And there was a lot at the time that I thought that, I felt really empowered and I felt like, going into a new relationship, I've got this, but I didn't have it at all. There was so much that I brought into this new relationship that I hadn't resolved from my previous relationship. Everything that you think you can avoid in a new relationship often ends up catching up with us anyway. So the biggest thing for me that I needed to let go of was my ego and my expectations. And part of the ego was the identity of, well, I'm a independent woman and I like to make decisions all for myself, and you can't talk to me like that. You can't tell me what to do. Like, I was very headstrong. And for me, the idea of being surrendered and to receive and to trust Carl's leadership in relationship was very new. And that was a big thing for me to learn very early on in our relationship.
So how long had you been married?
Married for 5 years, together for 7. Similar to Carl, you were 7 years in your relationship.
Six and a half was when it came to an end.
Yeah.
Was my last relationship.
And like, we had all the best intentions coming into our new relationship. I knew that it was very quick, and I was quite self-conscious of that as well. And we were very mindful coming into it, asking each other a lot of questions about where we saw ourselves in the next 2 to 5 years. What kind of family did we each, like as individuals, see for ourselves with our future partners? What values did we have? These were the kind of questions that I didn't get to ask my previous partner. And I was so lucky to be able to ask that of Carl, to understand the things that were really important to him to be mindful of. Obviously, I still had things I needed to learn along the way to be able to meet him there. So that was...
But we both did. We both had lots to learn over the journey.
Yeah, we did.
One of the things too, early on when we were voxing and getting to know each other, was I'd done an event, and at the event they'd asked us what was your deal breakers in relationships, and at that event I'd had an epiphany, a realization that the only deal breaker for me from a relationship is not being prepared to do the work. Basically, giving up on the relationship, that's the deal breaker. Like the moment you've given up on the relationship, that's when it's over. And so it's not you've cheated, it's none of this thing. Like all of that, I believe, can be overcome. And so we had that. I then brought that question to Liz and said, well, what's your deal breakers in a relationship? And I shared mine. And we kind of had that at a very core beginning. While we've navigated a lot of challenges, we've always kind of come back to that core of the only deal breaker in this relationship is giving up, is not being prepared to do the work.
What a beautiful tone to set right from the beginning. That's something that I have said to Nath probably a few times in the last couple of years. It's probably something I wish I had been aware of right at the beginning. But it's like, do you know what? If you ever feel like we need help, support, resources, like I promise to show up for that. Like I promise that if you want us to level up, I will go with you. And I think that a lot of couples don't make that commitment to each other that, hey, if our relationship ever gets sick, we're committed to healing it.
Yeah.
So true.
I think one of the biggest lessons I got when I reflect on my last relationship in particular, which went for 6.5 years versus this one, there's a lot of things that how I show up in this relationship that I showed up that same way in that last relationship. The key difference though is I was never 100% all in on that relationship. There was always it might not work out. There was I didn't have that commitment of like, I'm all in. We're going to make this work. And if ultimately you choose to give up, all right, so be it. But like I've made the commitment to myself that I'm going to show up and I'm going to continue to do the work, whatever it takes to make this relationship work. And if you were able to say, hey, I want to leave, I'm not just going to roll over and go, oh, okay. I'm going to be like, no, like I think we can do this. Like part of my work will be like, no, we can make this work. Ultimately it's your choice. But that's a huge difference in how I show up in this relationship. So I think a lot of the time, while on this episode, we might share some of the tools and tactics that we use in the relationship, the biggest thing I could share, especially to men out there, is if you can just make the decision that I'm all in on this relationship, it changes everything. That's been my experience.
Yeah. So was there something that was holding you back from making that commitment to your previous relationship?
There would be, ultimately, I think it's my own healing. I struggled a lot with, we've talked about masculine, feminine stuff. Like I've struggled a lot with my masculine from a young age, from a boy. I grew up getting bullied and even by soccer coaches telling me that I ran like a girl. And, I had a lot of self-worth around my masculinity as an issue. And I think that part of it, to even know that you can show up in a relationship and kind of claim your partner and go, I claim you, like I'm in on this relationship. And I don't know, it was a mindset thing. I just wasn't there. I had doubts, I had concerns, but all of those things, like on hindsight, we've both said this about our previous relationships. In hindsight, if we knew what we knew today, we could have shown up differently in that relationship, and it didn't work, but it could have had a higher chance of working, right? If we'd known what we know today. And I just wasn't there. I just wasn't at the point to be able to know that I could make that commitment. I also think one of the biggest lessons that I know Liz and I have navigated is my previous partner. She followed my lead. She surrendered in many ways. What she didn't do well was communicate her needs. And this was actually an epiphany just this morning that really hit me. Was I, as a man, never had the opportunity to adjust my behavior I was saying things and doing things that were hurtful and harmful to the relationship and to my previous partner. And she had this amazing heart to be able to do her own work and get through it, which is beautiful. Self-responsibility. She did her own work and she got through it. Except there were clearly times when she didn't. But I never knew. I never knew the damage. She never had the courage or the vulnerability to share with me, hey, I'm really hurting right now. What you did there, I felt this when this happened. And so when I didn't know the consequence of my own actions or the words or the things that I said, I never had an opportunity to self-correct. Whereas in this relationship, we've had a lot of those times where sometimes Liz has been able to do it in a really lovingly, soft way. And other times it's not been so soft. It's been a bit more direct and judgmental.
The corporate Liz comes back.
But the biggest thing there has been an option for me to go, I hear what she's saying. Where's the truth in that? And it gives me the opportunity to reflect. And I'm sure most men listening would agree with this, and maybe women too. But like, if we're told change, do this thing, it's very unlikely it's going to happen. But if you share, like if Liz shares with me, hey, I'm feeling really scared right now. I'm feeling upset. I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling whatever the feeling is. And I can understand how some of my behaviors may have contributed to that. Instead of her saying, you shouldn't do that ever again, I have the opportunity to reflect and go, how did I contribute to this? Okay, I don't want her to feel that way again. How can I shift my own behaviors? Or I can really own that to make my own changes and decision. And when I decide to make those changes, they will last versus in a relationship. So yeah, the biggest thing was just my past relationship. I never had that opportunity to grow in those ways because it was never shared vulnerably. Hey, when you said that, this is how I felt. When you did that, this is how I felt. And I didn't have that opportunity to self-correct, which I have in this relationship a lot.
I think that's such a missing piece for so many people, like that commitment to both giving and receiving feedback and allowing that feedback to be fuel and say, like, I love you and I care about you and I care about this relationship. So I want to share XYZ when that thing, when you did do that, when you didn't do that, when you whatever, this is how I felt about that. And I always think about, like, I'm a really visual person, so I think about feedback as like if you're in the car and you've got the GPS on, and if you miss a turn, you want the GPS to tell you that you missed a turn now, not 100 kilometers down the road, because you then have the opportunity to correct, change route, and adjust. Whereas if the GPS only tells you that you made a mistake an hour later, a week later, 2 weeks later, you've been off course for a really long period of time. I think that's something that Nathan and I have had to work on a lot. Like, early on, I think I was much more willing to give the feedback than get the feedback. And I needed to work on how I was delivering that feedback. But I would often find that I would give feedback to Nathan or advocate for an ask or a want or a need or a desire. And Nathan would just go to a million pieces and perhaps not have the certainty in the relationship that the feedback was for a good reason. I wasn't criticizing Nathan the person, but the action or the behavior. And then I would end up like having to put him back together, which then made me want to avoid giving that feedback. So it's a really dangerous loop that you can end up in if you aren't willing to receiving that feedback, because you need to hear it. If you don't hear the feedback, you just end up with unmet expectations and resentment.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, you reflected on your past relationship, and I've touched on what I wanted to do a little bit differently as we started our new relationship. And one thing, if it's okay for me to share, that I didn't mention was it is so important to express our needs and our desires to our partner, but think of it in a way that, how would you ask for what you need from someone that you truly admired, or you really desired, or you respected, or you appreciated? Are you showing up to your partner? Let's say it's a new relationship, as many of your listeners may well be in. Are you asking them that question as if you truly respect, admire, appreciate, and desire them? Are you giving them that time and that respect in how you're showing up? And are you asking the hard questions regularly, such as, do you feel appreciated by me? How am I showing you that I appreciate you? How can I show you more? And a really scary question, and this is something that I got from the Queen's Code, from Alison Armstrong's book, is what is something that's really important to you that you've actually given up on getting from me? And that's a scary one to ask because of, like, for me personally, I was worried about getting it wrong and not being enough. And the answer that Carl gave me when I asked that question more recently, and we're sort of within our first 3 years of being in a relationship, was so beautiful. It was, you used to scratch my back. And I love it when you scratch my back. And I really miss it when you initiate sex. I missed waking up at midnight and making love. Like, such beautiful answers. And here I was scared, going, oh my goodness, he probably thinks I'm the worst partner. But these are questions that had I asked in my last relationship and really treated that incredible man like he is appreciated, respected, admired, as he really deserved to be, I genuinely believe that it may have been a very different outcome. And there's absolutely zero regrets, but there's always remorse. And I do believe that remorse is such a key teacher as well. So that's definitely something that I would do differently.
Liz, can you articulate the question again?
Yeah, it's what's something that's really important to you, or what is something that you desire that you have given up from receiving from me as your partner?
I think that's so beautiful. And I think that I've seen this happen in a few different relationships where there's been tension, angst, arguments, conflict, and it's quite outward. And then one partner just disengages, and then they start almost preparing emotionally, mentally, physically to leave that relationship before they've even left. And I think sometimes the other partner might see that as like, oh, it's resolved, it's done. We're done arguing about that thing, when really what's happened is disengagement. So I really like, that's a really powerful question to dig under the surface of, go, okay, what have you disengaged from getting from me? Because that be like a little termite in your relationship if there's lots of those things just eating away at the framework of what you've got. But I imagine that the first time you asked that was probably pretty scary.
Oh, yeah. It was about 6 months into our relationship, actually.
You just read Queen's Code, I think, at that point.
By Alison Armstrong. And at that point, I had so many realizations about myself and how I'd previously shown up in not just my previous relationship, but all of my serious relationships throughout my life. And I was curled up in a ball, ugly crying, with so much, thanks, babe, so much remorse and shame from the things that I did that I just had no awareness of.
Yeah, we recently had Amanda Ashton on the show, and she talks about that stage of like looking in the mirror and facing self as like entering the pit. And it sounds like you entered the pit.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Well done.
Your whole energy changed. I remember after reading the Queen's Code in particular for Liz, there was a dramatic shift in the dynamic of our. There were still things that we then continued to have to navigate after that, but there was a huge shift in how you showed up and how we related with each other in a positive way. It was amazing.
I think like that kind of question is a really great example of like choosing your hard. It's like it might be hard to hear whatever your partner says, but how hard might it be if you don't hear the thing?
Yeah, very true.
And I kind of imagine with that type of question as well, and obviously with the answers that you got when you did ask that question, that what you're thinking in your mind is probably 10 times worse than what the answers were actually.
Yeah.
Like giving someone a scratch on the back, like, yes, it's a beautiful thing to do, but like it's not a big deal.
Easy
like,
to correct.
Yeah, it is really easy to correct. But I imagine that going into asking that question, you might be like, oh no, what's going to come up?
Yeah. We're our own worst enemies at times, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Carl, did you ask it back?
Did I?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
It was like, it was very much for me personally a journey of me relearning how to show up in relationship, because the one thing that I've seen, if I was to reflect on all of my relationships where I have left every single one of them, is there's one common denominator, and that's me. So I needed to really show up differently. So I was trying these very radically different things with Carl to try and change the direction that our relationship could potentially go in. I didn't want to repeat those same mistakes from the past. So yeah, no, you didn't ask that question in return.
And I think with the context of where we're at is like you were reading the book, you were practicing it. And so for me, it was really about holding that space for Liz to do this work and to ask that and just be there to answer the question. And it was less of a me go, hey, and so what about on in return? We were also, I think at this point, as you said, we were like 6 months into our relationship. So it was still super, super early.
A big part of what I'm hearing is that you're both very committed to your own personal growth journeys.
Yes, definitely.
Like we're owning our shit, basically. Like, and we kind of have a dynamic, which we didn't have at the beginning, but we have this dynamic now where it's clear for us that while we're in this amazing relationship together, that my job is like, if we're in hard times, part of my role is to help lead us out of those hard times, right? And for Liz to surrender and to share vulnerably,
To express.
And it's so I take on the role of like, I'm going to lead this relationship ultimately. Kind of, here's the vision that I have, and I lead that based on the expression and the understanding of Liz's needs, her desires, and the challenges, so that I'm always adjusting. As we were sharing, I'm adjusting where we're going. So that dynamic in itself has really helped us. You know, sometimes you hear people talk about, oh, it's a partnership, or they talk about like 50-50, co-captains, co-CEOs. Let's be honest, I know there's a few businesses out there that have co-CEOs, but most businesses have one CEO, and they have one CEO for a reason. And so we kind of take that same approach in our relationship of we're a team, we're doing this together. But in those times, I'm there to kind of go, okay, we're having some hard times. I'm going to lead. And so it might be just asking what's going on. Where are you at? What do you need?
Yeah. And that's not to say that my needs aren't being met. It's not to say that I can't communicate some things that I would have liked to have had happen differently. But if I go about it in more of a feminine and soft way, like, for example, earlier on in our relationship, one of our challenges was that Carl was comparing me to his previous partner, down to what I would wear. It was quite intense. And I think that naturally comes from coming very fresh out of a 7-year relationship for both of us.
Oh, yeah, I was hurting. I was not centered. I'm not proud of that time or that moment. Yeah.
And at the same time, I'm not proud of how I responded at the time. And if I could go back and do things differently, instead of screaming at Carl, telling him to, and jumping in an
Get
Uber.
out of my wardrobe. I want to wear what I want to wear.
Well, it was we were out and we were on a date, and we were sort of maybe an hour from where we were living at the time, and something came up. I can't quite remember what it was. It was to do with my outfit that I was wearing, and a comment about just I wasn't beautiful. Or he couldn't say that I was beautiful. You didn't want to lie.
Yeah, I think you asked me a question and I didn't want to lie, and I didn't find what she was wearing attractive, and I didn't want to lie and be like, oh yeah, it looks great, babe, because I'm like, I really was, especially at that time, I was really working on owning my masculinity, and to me that's about speaking my truth. And so my truth was hard for Liz to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And there was truth with maybe no kindness.
Yeah,
no, exactly. There wasn't devotion. There was no devotion in it. It was just straight.
It was
fact.
We call it stingy comments that sting a little bit. So instead of running away and getting in an Uber and sort of going, well, you know what, like, just F you, I just need to get out of here. If I had said, oh, okay, hang on a minute, I'm feeling really insecure right now, and I'm feeling really confused. Because I knew the story I was telling myself, at least, was that there was an image in his mind of another woman and how she used to dress and how she would show up. And I wasn't that woman. And all of a sudden I was feeling so insecure. And it wasn't good for me from a mental health perspective. And if I had addressed it that way, I know that we could have worked through it much faster. Now, we have already worked through that. And to have gotten through challenging times in a relationship where the ex is coming up, and to get through the other side of that and to have so many key learnings is just a miracle. I think past Liz would have run away to protect herself, would have walked away before the other could hurt me. And so I'm so proud of us for being able to get through it.
Before you leave me.
And that structure has shown up, especially in the early stages of our relationship. It would show up where you would want to kind of run away, or you try to push me away. And I think in some ways COVID made it harder for that to actually be possible, to just, I'm out of here. And so in many ways that was a blessing for our relationship, because it forced us to go, well, you can't just up and go, like, I've moved to another state, like we got to figure this out. But yeah, we all have them. Like, if you're listening, if you think you're fresh into a relationship, or you've been in numerous relationships, if you look at it, there's usually going to be a pattern, and the pattern usually is, I'm leaving this relationship before you leave me. That's usually what the structure is. If you're the one that's left, it's because you're leaving to protect yourself from feeling hurt or harmed. And if you're the person who's been left, you usually then are feeling like, well, I'm useless, I'm worthless. And so then you take that into your neck. Yeah, you take them to the next relationship, you become insecure that they're going to leave me. And we've had a lot of that, because my last partner, she left me. It was a huge surprise to me. Like, I came out of an event thinking I was going to propose to her, and she came out of that event and chose to leave. And so for me, it was a complete shock to my system. And because of that shock and trauma, I showed up in a way, it was so hard for Liz. It was hard for me too, but really hard for Liz. Here she is with a partner who's still struggling with his ex, still feeling confused about he really wanted his ex. He thought he was going to be with his ex and now he's not. And he's trying to make this new relationship work. But then as soon as some of the little things, in the honeymoon period, you start to see the other little things you didn't notice and you got to navigate that. It can be very easy to go, oh, well, it was better in my life. But here's the thing. Here's the biggest tip I could give anyone. If you're in a situation where you think you still have feelings for your ex, you don't. The answer is you don't actually miss your ex. You miss how you felt with your ex, him or her. And if you can get clear on, okay, why do I feel different? What is so you don't miss them, you miss how you felt. So why are you feeling different in this relationship that's bringing those thoughts, bringing the mind up to go, oh, I'm going to associate that to them. It's not them. It's about your internal experience. And that was months of me working on myself to get to that realization, to have that clarity. But that's a huge shortcut for anyone who might be struggling with that themselves.
So Liz, you were fresh out of your marriage, and Carl, you were fresh out of thinking you were going to propose to somebody else. What was the timeline there? Like how in it were you?
Well, Liz and I had our first date probably 6 months after my ex and I broke up.
So you were both at the end of chapters as you were starting this one.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'd had some time, I delved deep. I had a big spiritual growth, I guess you could call it. That relationship came to an end. I'd just kind of been sent on a path through Tony Robbins' work around exploring polarity. I don't know if you guys have talked on your podcast about polarity, but it started down that path of understanding polarity. And so this relationship came to an end. And so I was delving more into my masculine work. And I also came across Byron Katie. And so Byron Katie was hugely helpful for me. I could have these moments where I was fully detached. So Byron Katie, for those who aren't familiar with her, she's got this great process of really questioning your thoughts. And so I'm having these thoughts of I should be back with my ex. I was at a process to be able to challenge those questions. And so I'd have these great moments of peace where I'm like, I'm over my relationship, which gave me the confidence that, I'm ready to move forward. But then once I got in the relationship, that's when all of a sudden started to notice that I think it's very easy to be the wise, peaceful over your ex, over your relationship when you're single. And then when you get into a relationship, it's a mirror where all this stuff that's not resolved yet starts to come up.
May I share how I navigated it?
Please.
Which may be helpful for anyone that's in a similar situation. So obviously I already shared something that I wish I had done differently, which is simply expressing how I felt. I felt insecure. I felt really confused. I felt scared. But something that I actually got from Carl, you were working with Divya at the time. And to set the scene, so I had already quit my corporate job, and for me that was quite significant. And he's talking about his ex, and it was really confronting for me.
Because you're like, I put all my eggs in this basket.
Yeah, exactly. And I was so scared. And at the time, obviously, I just started delving into my own inner work around how I wanted to show up. And I had so much remorse from how I showed up in my previous relationship as well. And here's Carl really struggling internally with his feelings, with what he missed from his last relationship and how he felt. And so what I did to support myself was a little game called And Then What? So Carl decides, let's pretend that Carl decides, you know what, I want to try and win my ex back, which is what my inner critic was telling me. He's just going to try and win her back. He's not going to stay with you for too long. He's going to leave me.
He's only staying because we're in lockdown and he can't leave.
That one was on.
And you were convinced that if I went to my ex that she'd want me back or something.
Yes,
like you were
that's
so
the
convinced.
thing. I was so convinced that if there was some chance meeting that they would, realize, it's meant to be you.
The one that got away.
The one that got away, exactly. So the game, the and then what game is to simply run through all of your fears. So if Carl was to go and chase down his ex, and then what would happen? Okay, so I don't have a job. I could reach out to my previous boss who I'd parted ways with that company extremely well. And I could ask if there's any positions available for me. Okay, so there's no jobs available. And then what would I do? All right, so I am a very intelligent woman with a lot of cross skills. I'm sure I could find something that I could do here in Melbourne where I was living at the time. Okay, let's say nothing comes up. And then what? Okay, I could move back home to Western Australia, and I'm sure my parents would allow me to move back into my old childhood bedroom. Okay, and then what would happen? I would eventually find my feet again and I would be okay. It really helped me navigate those really challenging waters for us as a couple. And I really needed to ascertain that I would be okay. no matter what.
I love this, and if you haven't seen it, there's an incredible TED Talk by Tim Ferriss where he talks about this exact concept of fear setting, of like setting the worst possible fear. What's the worst thing I can imagine, and what would I do about it, and what could I mitigate to prevent that from happening? It's a really great TED Talk. I really recommend it. But I think that's so powerful. Like to remind yourself that, hey, even if I do fall flat on my face, I'm pretty resourceful and I can pick myself up and start again.
And having that frame of mind prevents you from steering away from what's true and authentic to you as a person. It prevents you from going, oh no, it's okay, that behavior's okay, and maybe fulfilling that role unintentionally of being someone that maybe feels small. It prevents you from doing that because you and yourself know, like, actually, I'm okay, I'm going to be okay. And it allows you to show up in a way that feels good for you. And for me, that was at that 6-month mark where I started to really step into more of a confident feminine role. And the relationship was huge for us.
What I really like about that too is that you removed the power from what Carl could do to you to like, okay, well, I have agency in this situation. I have autonomy. I have ownership. I have accountability. I have responsibility. And the power isn't actually with Carl. It's with me. I get to choose what I do in this situation.
Exactly. So true.
And you chose to stick around.
I did. I chose to do the work, which was our deal breaker. And do you know what's so funny about that is in my last relationship, I truly believed that my partner, my husband, wasn't doing the work. We haven't touched on this, but Carl and I met at a tantric sexuality workshop. And that workshop, I was hoping to be able to go to with my husband at the time. And there were many situations where I had asked for couples counseling, therapy to try and work through some of the challenges in our relationship. And when I left that relationship, I was so certain that he didn't do the work. He didn't show up. He gave up. But now when I look back at it, it's like, no, I was the one that gave up. I was the one that didn't express vulnerably what my feelings were and really give him the opportunity. As you mentioned before, you didn't have the opportunity to grow in your last relationship, and I didn't give him the opportunity to meet me there. So that was really profound for me to realize coming into this relationship.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. So we've how long have you been together now? Right, was it like three-ish years?
3.5?
3.5 years.
3.5 years, yeah.
And I know that you've got a beautiful daughter. So I'm really curious, what are you doing in your relationship now? What are some of the habits or practices that you've got daily, weekly, monthly to keep your relationship fueled up?
There's two things we do every week. The first thing we started with was a date night every week. And the way we approach this date night is I really own it. You know, in my past relationship, it was kind of like a 50-50. She would organize one. I don't. It was like, no, that's not how this works. And Liz, at first was like, I don't know if I'm okay with this. But
I want to help. My little inner good girl wanted to be good and organize the dates too.
But now, so every Thursday night for us is date night. And with a young daughter, and we've struggled with finding the right nanny for a long period of time, we've had to do date nights at home. And so I get creative. We've got a 2-story place, and downstairs we've got a big projector area. I often use the downstairs section to create various environments. On the projector, I've put like a campfire and then set up a picnic. And so we've had a movie, but in the moonlight type thing. We've done putt-putt golf with virtual reality. I've got 2 virtual reality headsets, and we've played putt-putt golf in virtual reality. So I found creative ways. I set up a comedy club by putting I was the comedian. I had a microphone out. I could put up posters around. So you can find creative ways to. The point of the date night, though, for me as a man, is this is me creating an opportunity for us to connect, but also to delight and just show. And there's a Tony Robbins quote that I'm sure you've probably shared over the years in your podcast that I always think back to all the time is, if you do what you did at the beginning of your relationship at the end, there'll never be an end. And so I always kind of come back to that all the time, is like, what are the things that I did or I'd want to do at the beginning of a relationship? How do I keep showing that? And date night, it's very easy once you have a kid in particular to be like, oh yeah, we're busy, we're too hard. We don't miss date night. The only time we'll miss date night is when we've been too sick. And we've had that recently. We were a bit sick. But otherwise, it's like date night happens. And we haven't had this happen yet, but my belief is, even if we're in the midst of a fight and we might be hating each other, date night still needs to happen. we still need to show up for date night. You can sit through date night and be freaking angry with me all day. I don't care. We're still doing this date night because I think it's that important. It's like, no, I've made the commitment. I'm going to do this. We're going to run this date night every week. So we do that on Thursdays. And that's not about sex. It's not about watching TV. It's really trying to find a way to delight. We had our first date night last night. Out of the house. We went and saw Michael McIntyre, comedian, in like first time in ages.
Him.
So funny.
So funny. So that was amazing. But the other thing we do every week, and this is more recent-ish, we call it midweek magic. And midweek magic basically is scheduled intimacy. It's not always sex, but it's kind of setting the context and the space. In particular for Liz, it creates in her mind, she knows, okay, this night is midweek magic. I know that there's a high chance that I need to show up in a way where I'm feeling open to sex. Mm-hmm. And just having that lead in can really help you be ready for that.
Yes.
But it's not always about sex. Like there's an opportunity that if we've got it and we show there, sometimes it's sitting and eye gazing. Sometimes it's just cuddling naked. But it's about creating an intimate moment, and it takes the pressure off there needing to be sex attached to date night. If that happens, amazing. But it's like date night is about date night. Midweek magic is about intimacy and connection.
The only thing that I'd like to add, as I understand that a lot of your listeners aren't parents yet. And I mean, even before you have children, sometimes a libido can lower as you get older, or for many reasons. Maybe there's stress going on in your life. But it's really important in relationship that you choose to show up. I know we've spoken about this before. But for me personally, I dived deep into some of the things that can impact a woman's libido. And I also did a little bit of work around something called Discover Your Erotic Blueprint. I don't know if either of you have heard of that before.
We had someone who contributed to the research of that on the show.
Yeah, that's so cool.
We first heard about it on, I think it was like Gwyneth Paltrow's like Goop? Sex Love. Yeah. So we like the erotic blueprint. Yeah.
Yes.
Share your experience.
Well, I did the quiz, and I was quite surprised to learn that I had my top two. I was sensual and sexual, which are kind of very different in themselves, but it kind of works well for us, depending on what mood we want to set. But there was this really funny thing that happened recently so every night Carl gives our daughter Talia a shower, and they shower together. And so part of the sexual erotic blueprint is simply you can become aroused by simply seeing things that are sexual. And he came running down the hallway after Talia. She ran away from the shower, and he's completely naked. And I thought, that's actually, I mean, obviously removing the fact that he's chasing after our daughter, but I found that quite arousing just to see him like that. And because I did the blueprint, I was like, great. So that's the sexual side of me kicking in. Or if I'm looking for something that feels a bit more embodied, we might put some music on. But it's been really interesting to do that work. And it's like when your brain starts to notice these things, you start to see things more often and become aware of when you start to feel open to intimacy throughout the day. Obviously, most people may have heard of the 5 love languages and how that can have such a positive impact on a relationship. For me, in this season of life that I'm in, it's acts of service. And so we often joke if Carl empties the dishwasher for me while I'm cooking dinner, I'm like, sexy. Oh, baby, you're talking dirty to me right now. Like,
take those dirty dishes. Take that dirty laundry. Take those.
I think this is an important topic too for people like, you don't have kids yet. You can often hear from people that, once kids come, sex is off the table. It disappears.
The doom story.
Yeah. And it's definitely true. I mean, I know people in my world that it is true of their relationship. But again, I think it comes back to it's a choice. Definitely there's a period of time you've got to navigate. The female body has to recover, and there's hormone changes, and there's so much going on. But that's where, at first, I was really resistant to the idea of our midweek magic scheduled intimacy. I didn't like the idea of it being scheduled. I was like, I want to still just be able to have spontaneous, and that still happens. We still have moments for that to happen. But we know now at least once a week there is a scheduled time that this is for us to connect sexually intimately in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And that has been helpful for Liz in terms of knowing how she can prepare to show up, and helpful for, I think, Nathan, you might agree with this. Most men would probably agree that no one likes being turned down when you initiate sex. But the real challenge as a man is when the woman says, no, not tonight. In the man's mind, this this is a no forever. I don't know when I'll next get it. That's kind of what's happening internally. The man's like, and so the freak out can happen. The internal, like, what the man needs to work on is, I don't know when it's going to happen next. Whereas if you've got a scheduled, you've agreed that this is our scheduled time, you as a man at least know, okay, well, I've still got midweek magic. There'll still be some sort of sexual intimacy. So even that alone has been helpful in those moments when the spontaneous doesn't quite get met with what you were hoping for. You've still got, okay, well, it's not a like no for weeks and weeks and weeks. We've still got midweek magic in a few days or whatever it is.
I think most people can also say the hardest thing about having a dry spell where you haven't been intimate with your partner is getting back on the horse. Once you've got back on the horse, it is so much easier to tap into that feeling of sensuality and act on it, or to communicate, hey, I'm really tired at the moment, but earlier today I felt really aroused. I was really open to receiving you, even though there was no way we could have made it happen because our daughter was awake at the time. Simply communicating that to your partner, I mean, I can't speak.
No, it does, because like as a man, like it is very much a like, and I'm sure it's similar for a female. If you initiate and you feel rejected, like there's a feeling of like, oh, I'm not desired in that way. I don't know if I'll ever get it again. Like that's at least in my experience and some other men I've spoken to, it's what's going on for you.
I really appreciate that you're sharing it. I also think it's like about making time, and I'm going to be a bit crass, but like, and this is probably like a real heteronormative kind of thing to say, but like the sexual intimacy thing like doesn't have to be penetration either. It's like your midweek delight. What did you call it? Midweek magic.
We call it midweek magic.
We did that because your dad could sometimes see your calendar and we were like, there's no way.
Yeah, we weren't going to put like scheduled, whatever. So we came up with midweek magic.
Banging.
Banging.
No, I think that's really important too, is like intimacy, a sexual intimate moment could just be like, oh, we're going to be naked together in each other's presence, not necessarily putting things in places.
Yeah.
Before we round out, I just wanted to go back to the 5 erotic blueprints because I think that's really important, and I think that's a really great free resource that people can access and resonate with. So there's 5 of them. There's the sensual type. It's someone who's turned on by all of their senses being ignited, someone who loves taste, smell, and they want a beautiful setting for their erotic play. The energetic type, so someone who's turned on by anticipation, space, tease, longing, and yearning, like that energy that you feel even before the kiss is happening. Then there's the sexual type, so someone who is turned on by what we think of as sex as a culture, nudity, genitals, orgasm, penetration. And then the kinky type, someone who's turned on by the taboo. Taboo can be different for different people, but what they turned on by what they find to be taboo. And then the shapeshifter type, so someone who's turned on by everything, the sensual, sexual, kinky, energetic types, and what they're turned on by. So the shapeshifter can be turned on by anyone and anything. So thank you so much for sharing that, because I think that's really, really, really valuable framework. And, we're on the Date Forever podcast and we talk about dating yourself and your chosen person for forever. So I think that part of dating yourself is about knowing these things about yourself, like what sexual blueprint or erotic blueprint am I? What is my attachment type? What are my preferred love languages? How do I learn? How do I receive information? What are my highest values? When do I feel incongruent? And all of those pieces that we just get to build this beautiful puzzle of ourself, and how intimately we look at the pieces that make up that big puzzle. So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. And thank you for letting us have a little peek behind the curtains of your relationship. And I imagine that there's going to be some beautiful love stories. One day you'll tell Talia all about this crazy COVID lockdown thing and she won't believe you that's what was happening in the world. But thank you for showing up and sharing with us. To say thank you, we have given access to a school uniform to a child in Cambodia. So with this uniform comes access to education. The intent here is to end poverty so that children can get an education and go on to have impact in their family, in their community, and in their country. This project's looked after by the Trailblazer Foundation, and we've made this giving possible via our partnership with Buy One, Give One. So thank you so much for being here and making that possible.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for having us.
No worries. So Carl and Liz, if people want to connect with you or learn a little bit more about your story, how can they do that?
I would say, just social media. So for me, Facebook is my primary thing. You'll find me as Carl, it's Carl with a C, D Taylor. So Carl D Taylor is like my Facebook handle. So that's my profile, the best thing to follow me. And then for you, babe, would you say Insta?
Yeah, so I have a profile on Instagram. It's just I am Liz Edwards, and you can see the various different seasons of life that I've been in on there. I've gone through as an integrative health practitioner. I went through this huge phase with essential oils and self-development, and now there's more family posts on there. But if you have a good scroll, you'll see a whole range of different things that I've shared over the years.
Some of your puzzle pieces.
Some of my puzzle pieces, exactly.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, I do have a podcast. So if you're a listener and you're a business owner and you're looking for another podcast to check out, Entrepreneurs Rising is what it's called. You can find it on your favorite platform too.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks heaps for joining us. If you love what we're doing here and want more, subscribe to the Date Forever podcast to make sure you never miss an ep. Come and hang out with us and other awesome couples who are fueling up their relationships in the Thriving Couples Collective Facebook group, or check us out at fuelcollective.com.au. Until next time, keep on dating, because better relationships equal a better world.